So I'm thrilled to be able to introduce to you Steve Levinson. So if those of you haven't met Steve, Steve is our Vice President of our cybersecurity practice. He doesn't call Winnipeg home like many of us do, but we're happy that he is here. And then we also have Adam Krieger with us. Adam is a principal consultant in our cyber practice who does call Winnipeg home, and we love having him here. So they're going to walk you through the next little bit. We're going to look at some of the real world risks and what you need to be able to do to kind of stay ahead and stay aware. So thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Cheryl. So you know what's better than opportunity? An opportunity. And I think Gen AI brings that and then some. Actually, I bought the domain name, and my wife called me an idiot, and I said, I'll be the last one laughing when I sell that domain name. But in the world of AI, so this just popped up on my feed like an hour ago. AI may have already surpassed human intelligence, divulges OpenAI CIO Sam Altman. So first of all, well, it's a human saying it. So to what degree can we trust him? And of course, he runs OpenAI. But we're really kind of getting to be at that turning point where everybody's using it in some way, shape, or form. So, as a person that's in the security space, we are always trying to figure out, okay, that's fine. We should be using it because either it's going to replace our jobs or we need to figure out how we build it in and how we incorporate it into our jobs so that we're staying one step ahead of it by using it as a really powerful tool. But from a security perspective, we also have to figure out, well, what could possibly go wrong? So we already changed the slide. So the phrase we had up there, you want to go back one? Each and every advance in artificial intelligence, we have an equal and opposite advance in artificial stupidity. It's actually a silly thing that we came up with, a roommate and I, 40 years ago. And if you think about it, I mean, it must be a pretty decent theorem because it still kind of holds true. So of course, how things could go wrong now are so much more different than maybe how they could have gone wrong 40 years ago. But the beauty of IT and technology is that it will never be perfect, partially because it's humans that are creating it, and we all have our flaws, and either through creating it or using it. So there's always going to be things we have to look for as the security practitioners. I don't know if you want to add some color commentary. And Adam and I are just going to kind of go back and forth as we're talking through this. And this is a nice smaller setting than where we just were. So we're happy as well to make this interactive. So as you guys have any feedback, commentary, questions as we're going, we're happy to just kind of stop and talk about it too.
Yeah, we're going to take a few lefts and rights pretty hard, and not necessarily all these topics are going to slide really well into each other. So if you throw out a question there, no problem interrupting.
So the funny part of this, we've both had plenty of content in our minds. We've had plenty of other slides that we've used in other presentations. I thought, it's high time to go back to the well and let's just see what ChatGPT says. If I was going to do a presentation about what are the top security risks that might encounter by using AI, and it spit out a list, and then we massaged it because, as with anything else, I mean, you kind of drink your own champagne. There are some things like, well, that doesn't really matter. And then we fine tune it and we came up with this list here. And then of course we've added a lot of our own details as we've gone along.
A perfect analogy for how probably employees or coworkers or folks that you're working with are actually using AI in their everyday business, right? Generating lists, using it to, spawn off ideas, creating something out of nothing, which is kind of the sort of, philosopher's stone that we're all kind of expecting it to be.
So with that, we want to go to the first slide. And again, we want to have stuff for people to look at, but it's just quite interesting how much everybody has embraced AI. And really, if you just think about IT and technology, I think, as a security guy, and yes, I was an IT guy long before security, you just kind of morph into it over the years. But I think technology evolves quicker than humans' capabilities to understand what the hell it's doing to us. Yeah, it's anything from how to use it to how to protect it and secure it, which of course creates an entire industry for security people like us. And yeah, so we're always trying to catch up to it because it's evolving at an asymmetric pace. So, which is why our jobs will never get boring as long as we're kind of keeping up with it by either using it or embracing it, but not ignoring it because it's going to be there no matter what. So, I mean, it's becoming more part of everything. Everything from hell, our houses. I replaced our wireless routers about 3 years ago, and I had about 50 devices I had to change out because everything's talking to everything. So it's anything from in your home to how you're using it at work. So.
Yeah, I think it was really great that Tim had the trough of disillusionment, the AI hype cycle in there, because I think there's different ways to look at this generative AI kind of revolution, and as it sort of sweeps through and tries to touch and apply to everything that we're doing. There's also that as that slope kind of creates downwards, the number of implementations that then obviously get created in the wild spawns off tremendously. With that comes a type of vulnerability that we're not aware of yet, a type of vulnerability that we're not necessarily prepared yesterday to address. So we have to, understand that with cloud, with mobile first, there's different ways of creating systems and then having vulnerable systems. We're going to have that same kind of cycle with AI as well.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah, it's just different styling.
I don't know if you want to talk to this one a little bit too.
Sure. Yeah. So why has it grown so quickly? I mean, that's sort of self-explanatory, but also I'd like to dive into it a little bit. I mean, it's a technology that attempts to be universally applicable. We can talk to it in our language, but of course, one of the things that it was hard enough to make systems secure when what we were doing was creating the interfaces that it used to talk to each other, right? I have this API, it talks with this data structure to this other API, very predetermined way of those two systems conversing, and we were in control of that entire scenario. Now, we are being conversational with our systems. So not only are we addressing our systems in the language of how we're speaking, how I'm talking to you right now, we're having conversations with these systems. So the permutations and combinations for the interface with those systems has increased 1,000-fold. That's being conservative. So really, we need to understand that the number of interactions and the number of ways that we're going to have interactions with these systems is spawning off exponentially, and this opens up the door for all different kinds of ways to either abuse these systems, get inaccuracies out of them, falter all over ourselves because we've not implemented things correctly. So a number of the topics we're going to talk about today is trying to find the same kind of techniques and ways that we prepare with other technologies and abstract them out and say, well, how can we get to an exponential approach to addressing these new kinds of systems?
And it's become so pervasive, right? I think way back when I took Fortran class in college, and we actually had to run everything printed out on cards and run it through the computer. And you had to really speak fluent computerese / Fortran to be able to figure out what you're doing. Now, pretty much anybody can do anything I can't even tell you the nth power of more complexity than we could 40 plus years ago. And it's going to keep evolving that way. It's going to be easier and easier for anybody. You don't have to have an IT background. You only have to understand technology to at least get your hands on this. So, which is a beauty and a curse at the same time.
Yeah. So what are we actually talking about? Boots on the ground. What kind of things are we looking out that are evolving with AI? Well, kind of broken down a couple categories here. Social engineering, it's going to supercharge that, right? We're used to social engineering attacks in the past being roughly manual. Folks that are interested in pulling information out of our personnel and out of our corporate systems, well, they then have to craft a script, or they have to talk to us in a certain kinds of way. They have to create the actual dialogue that they have to, you can train actual individual people on social engineering against a company or things like this. A lot of that barrier to entry is now right on the floor. You can actually pull all of these things directly out of AI. You can talk. It's not very difficult. Some of the models have guardrails where they recognize that you're trying to persuade someone into doing something unethical. It's not really that hard to get around some of those guardrails. Really darn easy to convince some of these models help me convince a company to divulge their banking information, or help me to get past the person on the front desk and see when the next time they are scheduling a utility appointment, so that I can impersonate that utility officer and get into their server room, for example.
It's gotten more and more creative, right? If you think about way back when, right, you get that email from the Nigerian prince or things like that, and you're able to see just simple patterns. But now, because it's so creative and polymorphic, I mean, whatever attempt they made 5 minutes ago completely changes or morphs a little. So getting into the defenses of it, right? We used to be able to use signature-based systems because they see patterns to be able to block something that came in yesterday. But now, because everything is getting more creative, it changes how we need to defend as well.
And that's just even in just text conversations, emails, phone calls. That's one of the others. But many companies, their executives or their director level are more exposed. They've done more interviews. They're out there on YouTube talking up there. As social media has lowered the bar to entry, it is also more exposed the corporate level out to the public, and that kind of leaves us more open to things like deepfakes, or taking all that exposure that now all these executives are talking person to person with their constituents, essentially. All that data can be ingested by models and actually create vectors for attack against the company itself.
Yeah, I mean, the old adage, everyone's probably heard, trust but verify, which was fine for a while. That's no longer the way to approach things. Now it's don't trust until you verify. And what happens is we either become complacent, or we actually do get fooled, or we're busy or distracted, and we end up following, anything, clicking on that link or doing something that maybe we shouldn't have done because we weren't thinking about it. So we can't rely 100% on the computers or our systems to protect us. Part of it is ongoing security awareness training. We have one of our folks here in the room who does that with a bunch of our clients, and it's never ending. You can't just, for anyone who just does security awareness once a month now at your company, once a year, that's not any good anymore. These attacks are happening every day. So you don't need it to be taken every minute of your day when you're doing it, because we all have our real jobs to do. But we need to make sure it's constant, awareness, because believe me, the bad guys are, going after it. So we got to stay ahead of it. And it's hard. It's hard to, if you look at the average click rates, even for companies that do the spear phishing campaigns, it's still anywhere from 3 to 10%. So people are getting fooled all the time, and so it's hard. It's easy to say, don't trust until you do verify, but you really need to just figure out ways to apply it every day.
Yeah, particularly as we're going into this new adoption and evolution cycle, right? While we're on that sort of riding the wave of the hype cycle, new attacks and new different ways of vulnerability are still being discovered, right? What scale can this be applied? Those kinds of things. And so how do we, so once a year, you don't want to have to wait 364 days for the kind of, counter programming and training to actually get that out there in a while. It needs to be more continuous and evolutionary and just in time, which is a great segue into AI enhanced malware. So you thought it was bad enough when folks were actually just rolling out a single program, or whether it's a worm or a Trojan or what have you, that got into systems and affected something. The most common kinds of things that were found vulnerable in the past were things that everybody used or everybody had to have one of: routers, operating systems, server hardware, things like that, right? They're finding things that everybody was implementing. But now with AI, you can actually take the vulnerability to our custom implementations. All the applications that we've been writing are all a little bit different from each other. What's AI really good at? Taking all these things that are slightly different, homogenizing them, and looking for the differences in there. So not only that, not only can AI help attackers do additional profiling, figuring out what kinds of things have been vulnerable to in the past, and sort of attack off in that general direction. It doesn't have to be specific anymore. You can also have AI written malware, where you're just asking these, the same kind of things where we can enable our software development teams to generate things that give us value. Attackers can do the exact same thing on the other side of the fence. And of course, polymorphic malware, now we're taking those things and trying to actually look at all the different ways that we're writing applications and just saying, go attack it. Find me something that looks like value, or find me something that looks like an exploit. and the AI will come back and help you out with that.
Yeah, so you don't have to be a real pen tester to pen test anymore, because all this stuff is right there.
We're lowering the bar all over the place, unfortunately. And then, AI-based evasion, it's going to be harder to catch things. But all these things are going to be better at cleaning themselves up. They're going to know how filters are applied. The attacks are going to be starting to invert the ways that we're detecting them. So we're up against a lot, right? So what do we do about it?
So a lot of this also kind of ties into defense in depth, right? If you think about it, and we've been saying this for years, the attackers have the asymmetric advantage. So what does that mean? Is the good guys trying to protect our enterprises, or heck, even trying to protect our own personal stuff at home? We got to be right 100% of the time, right? If we get to patch something, if we click on that link, if you fill in the blank, that could open the door from an attacker, for an attacker. On the other side, the attackers could be wrong a million times in a row. What do they care? They're using a lot of these tools that they just push a button and the tool does it. It just needs to be right once, and it could get into your network. So hence, it's really important to come up with as many defense and depth mechanisms. So even if the attacker makes it through the outer perimeter or makes it onto somebody's laptop, you have other controls in place that can hopefully help either slow down or prevent further attack.
Yeah, similar to the analogy that Tim used about how folks are attacking the chatbots and trying to get them to do things that are more advantageous to the customer, let's say. That same sort of thing can dive deeper. So how do we make sure that when we're bringing in all these AI systems, that we're putting the right guardrails around them? Guardrails that previously we never really had to think about, because we were generating systems to have, again, the interfaces that we intended them to have. We were building languages, APIs, ways for them to talk with each other. Well, now the ways that they're talking with each other is conversational. They talk in English, they talk in persuasion, they talk in reason. So how do you set boundaries around thought and reason and determination, right?
So this is one of our fun ones. We have a few of the slides that are the big talking slides, so this would be one of them here.
This is definitely one. So, how do you dig into the actual concepts of? You need to know some of the more fundamental concepts of generative AI and how it's actually being used, and some of the underlying things about these models. And the way that you're going to do this is going to be dependent on how you're actually bringing these systems in, right? Are you just bringing in something like an OpenAI wrapper, and you're just talking through it with an API, and then you have to give it a sort of context model protocol interface with your systems? Or are you building your own data models? Are you training with your own data? That's going to change a lot of these things, right? But really, the attacks on these systems are going to be pretty varied, right? Some of those things are that they might try to infer the original data that it was being trained with, right? Which could be an issue if you're training your data models, but you're not actually being great about sanitizing your data in the first place. Someone could be leveraging your models, right? If you're not the model creator, maybe you're a little less worried about that. But if you are creating models and actually, using that as your differentiation, you also have to consider the risk of, well, what happens if folks just keep on asking that model with a prompt and collating all those outputs and then using those to essentially take all the value of the model for themselves.
Call those vapor trails, right? Especially if you're using models that are available to to the public. So it could potentially inadvertently leak your intellectual property, right? If you've been spending all this time building out models and someone just maybe blindly, or maybe it's a competitor who kind of knows what you're up to, they could potentially be right on your heels, and you have no means of protecting it because it's out there, right?
Yeah, and I mentioned that trying to get the models to evade guardrails and get around these things. Well, you also might be trying, your folks might be trying to, or attackers, or anybody who's trying to use these things, might be trying to determine where the bias is in the models and try to feel out the constraints that you've placed on it. It's sort of the old saying, security by obscurity, right? We can't assume that exists in AI, in generative AI either. Folks that are able to generate prompts and sort of feel out through interaction with the model we must assume that what they could do is essentially just output the original training data of the model or any of the biases or guardrails that could be there. That may sound like a difficult task, but if we start from that assumption, we're an awful lot better than where we were with the last time around, where we're just kind of assuming that the systems that we build are behind a locked door and nobody will ever know how they work. All these different ways of attacking these models can lead to, of course, IP exposure. If we're building IP into the data that it's trained with or into the models themselves, we must consider that that has a chance of getting out there. The data itself, the original training data, no matter how well it has been sanitized or anonymized, there are techniques for de-anonymizing things, so that is always a risk. And of course, the service value disruption. If people are just stealing your model's value outright, then how do you actually, lay a moat down around your service?
So this next one, if you think about it, right, most of these data sets have been procured by humans. So first of all, there's going to be bias in that, just in our inherent nature of being flawed creatures. Secondly, a lot of times this data, even before we start with it, has been manipulated by computers who have humans who have written the program. So there could be a second degree of bias there. Then couple that with, now we're going to take this and munge it through a whole other set of things in the world of AI. So it's not to say the data is wrong or flawed, but you got to come in eyes wide open and look at it and say, does this make sense? Are there the possibilities that there could be bias or flaws in the data? And don't just blindly trust what the model has spit out.
Yeah, it's really reasonable to assume that it's not going to be just, a year from now and all we've done is adopt OpenAI and now we're using it to, generate our presentation agendas and then refine them from there. And we're like, great, we've implemented that. We've, decided that we have generated the template. It is now still up to us to look over the template and say, yes, I accept that as the template and move forward. It's going to spin out from here, right? Not only is that original relationship going to change, but each interaction through that is going to continue to look for like the next iteration of what's going to happen, right? So the models are going to be trained based off of the prompts that we enter. The models can be shipped off the shelf and with a sort of preset amount of data, and then we are going to consider taking our own organization's data, sanitize that, and sort of build onto the original training set. So there's a munge there of the original training data that was procured from who knows where, right? Maybe out in the wild, maybe it's a preset of known good data, piling our organization's data on top of that, and coming up with some sort of thing that evolves over time from there. So what is that? How much is that? How much does it bias towards your company's data versus something that's out there on the wild? Do I have to take my organization's value system and load it into every prompt before I ask it what to do? Things like that.
So we kind of touched on privacy and protection, right? If you have a data set, especially if it has any sort of sensitive data whatsoever, if you're going to start running it through a model, again, start thinking about, well, what's the worst going to happen if this gets out there? And it might even take looking at it from a couple angles, because it's one thing to strip out maybe banking account numbers and things like that, but there might be other information that's sensitive in there. So first and foremost is just to make sure that you're doing the right things to protect in that sense. But if you think about it too, it propagates with other folks that you might share the data with. Maybe it's third parties, it could be anything. So because of the fact there's just that much more computing power that's taking place now, there could be that many more vectors where you may have the privacy or confidentiality concerns.
Yeah, how many folks are familiar with anonymization techniques? Few hands. How many are familiar with statistics as well? Same kind of group of hands. So it's interesting because we can understand that not like just because a single row is anonymized does not mean that it is not perfectly anonymous, right? You can infer that, and even if one row is potentially disguised, if my first, last name, and date of birth are hidden from a row, it doesn't mean that I can't be de-anonymized as a member of a population, right? Sometimes it doesn't matter that you need to, if you have a record set, de-anonymize down to, am I in that record set or am I not? Now it's just a matter of finding, well, I'm in there, so ergo you can, you can determine, say, therefore I share some of these characteristics, or I share some of these characteristics on a 35% chance of the time. So there's different inferences that you can make out of that set of data. And of course, all of that stuff, then you have to consider, well, we used, imagine down the line, you're there at a press conference, something's been popped, someone got hurt as a result of it, and you're being asked the question, what did you do to protect the people that are in your data set? Consider that now so that you have a really good answer with if and when that does happen.
Those are a lot of the risks, right? They can be anything from legal risks to compliancy risks to contractual risks with your clients to even things that can damage your brand, right? It can be any of those things that, again, we think about what's the worst that can happen kind of scenarios here. Those are the things to kind of consider, which I know is hard. It's easy to say. It's hard to do as we're evolving technology so quickly, but it should always be something that's on the back of our minds.
Right, as we're offloading additional concerns, like similar to the way we did with cloud, where we offloaded a whole bunch of concerns to somebody else's infrastructure. Now we're taking a lot of our data flows and offloading it to somebody else's determination. So in the past, with the cloud adoption, maybe we replaced the pipes and we said, well, now the pipes are not our concern. They're maintained by somebody else. We don't care. Well, what's going through the pipes is the data, the water, the what have you. We're actually taking some of that and saying partially some of this is somebody else's concern as well. So we really have to understand what we're doing with that and how much of that is still on our responsibility. The training data, whether that's something that is off our plate or on our plate, we need to consider that. The different kinds of models that are being used, what are the inherent biases, what are the different levers that we can pull, like Tim alluded to. We talked about the hallucinogen, I'll say coefficient, things like that. Access control, storage, and API web services, because of just because we're pulling in next generation technology and different ways of thinking doesn't mean that it still doesn't rely on these underlying things that we had to secure yesterday. Similarly to when we were writing our own things by hand and shuffling our own data around by hand. So yesterday's concerns still need to come along.
Yeah, where they're coming into play. How many of you guys have a third-party risk management program? Because this kind of ties into on steroids now, right? Because now potentially these third parties are doing a heck of a lot more than maybe just a thing or two. And I mean, heck, I'm our CISO as well as running our practice. So I get the pleasure of answering those questionnaires probably about once a month. And I find that a lot of people just ask every partner they work with the same questions, which is not effective. And a lot of times, once you get the answers, you don't even look at them. I know, I've seen this. So, but part of this, how it really comes into play is, understand to what degree any partners you're using, if they're using AI or if they're an AI partner, to what degree something could go wrong, and just ask them the right questions. Some of them you might not be sharing anything that matters. Don't ask a bunch of questions. Others might be doing a huge chunk of your business, and you want to understand how they're doing things. And no, a SOC 2 report doesn't answer everything. All it answers is how well you follow your own processes. So make sure you're asking the right questions if you are entrusting any third party with any data that you care about, right?
Yeah, so how many in the raise a hand if you've adopted Gen AI internally, or you're replacing some internal mechanisms with a portion of AI-driven services? Yeah. And how many are taking some of those AI-driven services and then actually offering them to your customers and offering services driven that way? Not as many, but I've seen that in some. I'm also a virtual CISO for some of our clients, and it's been interesting watching more and more clauses leak into data protection agreements, and more questions getting into security questionnaires. Are you training with my data because you're handling it? Is my data getting into models? Is my data being shared via prompts with some other third party who's driven by AI? Do I know for a fact that they're not training on it? So it exacerbates the the issues that we had yesterday with third-party risk management.
And thematically, right? Remember I said in the beginning that technology evolves faster than our capability to figure out what the heck it's doing? Even worse is policies and procedures. They lag way behind, right? And we are now at that point in time where we need to make sure, at least to some degree, we've got policies and procedures that kind of address it. I mean, we're not going to be all the way caught up. We never will be. I mean, trying to be realistic. So I know Tim had asked, but we have a smaller crowd here. How many of you guys have an AI acceptable use policy or something like that? All right. How many people has it been well circulated at your guys' companies or? Because it's one thing to have, and it's a starting point. You have to have it. I mean, we have one ourselves, but our next step in our journey is, okay, well, there's all these platforms that are just showing up. Who should be using them? How should they use them? Because then we have to start doing all the use cases, which we'll touch on a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Like now.
Like now.
So, there's always shadow IT, and it was, it's the bane of a lot of our existence, especially the security people. It's like, oh God, they're out doing this. Especially way back when cloud came into play, be it AWS or Google or whatever. All of a sudden, people were standing up entire, sometimes enormous environments, sometimes with enormous runaway processes because they didn't know how to run the things. So couple that, even more so now. So this picture, you guys have all seen Animal House. At the end, Kevin Bacon, where he says, "All is well." There's nothing you can do about the stampeding crowd. That's kind of now the security person trying to stop or control the world of how quickly AI is evolving. So from that, there's a lot of things we've come up with that are, because it's going to happen. People, you want people to be innovative, right? This is how we all advance our businesses, but we want to do it responsibly, and it's hard to make sure that people are thinking through that as we are evolving that way.
Yeah, like that Shopify and Salesforce quotes were really really in line. You can't help but jump on the train because there are so many folks the differences are so evident that unless you embrace it and try and have a plan for it, you will wind up finding out that a lot of folks are using it on their own anyway, or they're using it to change their own jobs, either for fear of displacement or as a differentiator. So if that's happening down at the individual level, whether you like it or not, it behooves you to go out there and govern it, to actually find out how it's being used. And that's not even necessarily to say, I only want you to use it this way, or I want you to stop using it that way. But it's also to educate and to train and sort of to guide people towards what is acceptable use, right? And what is, the thing you should be targeting. But it also allows you to say, like, well, how do we make sure that this is ethical? Or how do we make sure that we're conducting our business in the same way that that our customers and our associates and our partners expect us to?
And part of it's become so ubiquitous that sometimes people aren't even going to know they're using AI, right? I get it, right? It's become that seamless. So again, it's just a lot of it's just like security awareness training. It's a lot to just make sure, look, we want you to be innovative, right? This is how we all advance our businesses. But again, we need to do it responsibly and make sure that everyone kind of understands what this all means.
Yeah, I come from a software development background, and when ReSharper came out, and you could just hit Alt-Enter and get a suggestion for how to change a line of code to another line of code, and it gave you a reason for why you should do that. We thought that was a tremendous shift in the way that we all did work. Now we had this tool jumping in, making our code more consistent, changing things, improving the quality, fixing errors and things like that. But it was doing it algorithmically, right? Yeah?
So, really not accepting these policies, but you say it needs to be paired with more education, right? How to use it, why to use it. Policy
Not alone, no. And I think that you can associate a non-acceptable use with penalty, but then you might find yourself behind as far as the adoption curve goes, right? We have to understand that the use of these things is so transformational that a lot of these folks are missing out, right?
I don't want to say no, but what from your perspective, like how do you best educate the workforce on how to use it, why you want to?
I think probably the best way, right? Because policy is policy. Let's face it, policies are all dry and boring, and they withstand the test of time, but we have to have them, right? So then that's where you kind of dive into the use cases. Sometimes it's good just to have a SIG or a working group say, hey, we're thinking about using this. Maybe you start out with something basic like Grammarly. I mean, you can use that to figure out how I write things better, but now does that mean a sensitive document that I wrote is floating out there? And you come up with some just basic things, and so everyone, you know you're embracing it. We want to use these, but we're also talking through it to figure out, hey, how should we and how should we not be using these tools?
And I think as security people, like we're always been waving the flag of invite us to the table so that we can tell you how to be secure when you're conducting our business. I think we also need to do the same thing with the sort of creative business and innovative minds and say, let's invite them to the table and let's develop these not only acceptable use, but a sort of, pulling the carrot out there and giving the incentive, and let's draw people towards what we expect these things to be used for, come up with those examples so that people aren't left in the dark and, they aren't trying to just trip over themselves until they find something that they're not supposed to be using in a specific
it's the
way.
kinder, gentler CISO's office, right? Way back when, the CISO was the one that prevented business from happening. But that's not how our world's supposed to work. You want the CISO or whoever's wearing a security hat to be part of it so that you can just iterate as reasonably, as securely as you can, right? The more you can kind of build it in foundationally, and yeah, maybe it becomes more of a philosophical or a cultural thing, but it's got to be on that ground floor and not that afterthought, because especially now at the speed in which everything's moving, if it's an afterthought, it's too late, right?
Yeah, so when we talk about things like IP and PII, those are very hard, things that we must, try and keep a safeguard over. Not only IP, it's very important for us to understand where we are because that differentiates us as individual businesses, but the PII is now regulated. It's governed by our, specific geographical or regional governments. We have to handle it correctly because that is the right thing to do for the person next to you, right? So how do we teach the people that we're working with how to write prompts that get you the right answer, but without being specific? And of course, I didn't see a whole lot of hands on whether folks were actually building AI into their systems that they're particularly offering, but that doesn't mean that things like red teaming and bias determination is off your plate, right? You essentially are now going to the systems that you're going to bring in and tell people to use, and you're going to be looking for those characteristics in those systems. As far as standards or anything like that on what's out there, that is still very, very in the mix and still being determined and figured out, because that's a very difficult thing to settle on. Like, the services themselves haven't even settled on how to offer these things, never mind what is an acceptable level of red teaming. But of course, we should be looking for something there, right? We should be looking for some kind of explainability, particularly in higher risk, higher criticality use cases, medical, legal, financial, things like that.
So is there, like, because we talked about how it's evolving so fast, is there a good framework for like keeping pace with like the models that stay advanced, like Copilot or ChatGPT, and you can say, okay, we've done the security review, we've looked at bias, we've looked at explainability, we're good, and then they have new features, like the update model.
Yeah.
What's the right?
Yeah, so NIST has released an AI risk management framework.
Right.
NIST, yeah. So they have released an AI risk management framework, and so that's going to get us started. I know that other organizations are coming out and releasing other things, whether they be special publications or general guidance. But I think NIST is probably the most defined as of today.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So this one kind of speaks for itself. It's funny, my wife is a recovering lawyer, and so I tell her, your job's going to be replaced by computers, especially the paralegals. And then she'll turn around and say, well, they're going to do the same with you in security. It's probably true for us all, right? The world is morphing quickly, and yes, in 10 years, probably the stuff we're all doing today isn't going to be a thing anymore. Maybe a fraction of it will be. So we all need to continue to morph our skill sets, and along those lines as well, right? We're going to need to bring in fresh people. There's a lot of kids now at university that have been growing up with this stuff, whereas we're just kind of all diving into it, it's kind of smacking us off the side of the face. But it's going to become that much more important because it's going to be pervasive. And so just like everything else in IT, right? We need to keep our skill sets current. I mean, there's some that withstand the test of time. You know, the mainframe developer, programmers, or the 4 mainframes left on the planet, they still have jobs. But but being more serious, we need to keep up with this stuff, right? So I think it's the kind of thing. If we keep current, we're going to just learn how to harness the power of it, and we don't have to worry about our jobs. For the folks that either just are done with it or aren't keeping current or totally blind to what's happening, they're the ones that are at risk. So I think that's a key thing. And then just making sure that we or the people around us have the necessary skill sets, be it through hiring the right folks or bringing in the right teams or consultants to help with, to continue to drive our efforts.
Yeah, and to develop an agile skill set that is ready to be disrupted. The kinds of things and the ways that we're writing prompts today might not be the same way that we're writing prompts tomorrow, for example, right? New models come along, new generations come along, they have more explainability and stuff like that. So really optimistic pessimism or pessimistic optimism, however you want to put it, we have to understand that these things are very rapidly transforming the way that services are being offered from business to business and business to consumer. So we have to be ready for that. And if we're not ready for that, we at least have to try and figure out and forecast where to go next to be able to better understand how to work with each other.
There's one more question on that last one. What was the target? If you were to throw a percentage range on that, so you're saying, hey, we should have a workforce that's knowledgeable about AI security, that pocket, you need everyone.
I think that goes into like a risk assessment, right?
Yeah.
Similar to having a risk assessment of, we have high risk data and then we have more high risk data in this area of our business or more in that area. I think having that same risk assessment and figuring out, well, how disruptible are we over here, or how risky is it for this section of the business? How likely is it for that section of the business to be disrupted or outright replaced with some of these models that are coming out, right? If we depend exclusively on that, or we think we're overly at risk in that particular area, then where do we spend our resources on trying to transfer that? Is that something that we draw a moat around? Is that something that we build walls around? Or is it something that we understand is ultimately detrimental to our overall strategy? Which is the same thing that we would do if we were storing a whole bunch of data that was really high risk but really low value. We would say, well, you should probably change that, right? Why store millions of medical records if you're not actually going to use them or do something with them that is valuable for your customers, right? It only puts you more at risk. So the same thing of if you've got a particularly skilled workforce that is doing a thing and a new technology is going to come along and disrupt that, you're in the same kind of relationship. You're spending a lot of money pouring into a particular kind of resource that is then easily disruptible. You can't really change that. That's a byproduct of the overall economy and general business environment, right?
That answered the question?
Yeah, I think sort of. Yeah.
Maybe dive a little deeper, or zone in. Okay, cool. Great.
Right. So Tim already kind of talked about the Air Canada one, but again, there's a lot of potential ways where things can go terribly wrong. Again, when my wife and I were having our she always wins our debates, so I'll say I know it ended, but we were having our debate. She said, "Well, somebody was using AI for a case, and they argue it in front of the judge, and the judge actually did a little research, and it was all false information. So this attorney got disbarred because they were just relying blindly on fake data that happened to be somewhere. So there's a lot of ways where, again, we can't blindly, believe the things we see, but we also just need to be careful about what we create and what could potentially go wrong. So again, I think we're all for using AI. We all need to. This is where we're all headed, but we just need to be as eyes wide open, more so now than ever.
Yeah, there's a tremendous temptation, especially with the ways that different companies, different AI providers are talking about things, from things being pair technologies that support you to being peer technologies where you're offloading more of the responsibilities to them. There's a tremendous temptation to offload the actual confirmation or the approval or the sign off on the output coming out of these tools. We have to understand that if we do that, we are also giving up the right to say, I didn't know when things go wrong.
All right, so here's our takeaway. It's the money slide now, the takeaways. So we talked about AI policy. If anybody has a need for that, we are happy to share one. We created it, gosh, now it's been about 2 years ago. It's morphed a little bit since then. And we're at our next little stance where we're now, as I said before, we're going through various use cases of tools that we're all using all the time. But we're happy to share that if you'd ever like. We're also happy to go, to sit down with you guys and your companies to just do a 2-hour workshop to kind of talk through these things, because everyone's got their own separate journey. We kind of spoke in generalities because we want to talk to everybody, but we're happy to talk with any of you guys about any concerns you have, either from a security perspective or from a strategic perspective, as Tim had mentioned before. Happy to do that with any of you guys. And
conduct things like risk assessments. Look for more specific cases that really need to start getting into the actual details to say, well, what are the risks to doing it that way or not doing it at all, or fully adopting these technological tools and overturning things to them, right? Some of those things need more detail.
Yeah. So since my last comment was already on the first page, I have a lot of Steve-isms. So the other thing I'll say, because again, I'm in security, so I could say a lot of silly stuff. The problem is not the silicon, it's the carbon. So we always need to be focusing on that. I don't know if we have anything else. I think that's our last slide. Yeah. So appreciate all you guys.